Before he ever held a gun, before Texas learned to fear his name, he was just a boy, barefoot, starving, and owned. He was born in the early 1850s on a cotton plantation in the Deep South, a place where human life was cheaper than livestock and pain was the main language spoken. No birth records, no last name, just a number in a ledger and a body expected to work until it broke. By the age of 6, his hands were already scarred, not from play, from labor. Dawn meant work. Dusk meant more work. Night meant collapsing on dirt floors beside others who were too tired to speak. Crying wasn't punished because it wasn't allowed to start. You learned that fast. The overseer didn't need reasons, a slow step, a dropped basket, a glance held too long. The whip came anyway. Pain wasn't corrective, it was routine. It reminded everyone who owned the future. But this boy was different in one dangerous way. He watched. While others learned obedience, he learned patterns. Which guards drank too much, which paths were used at night, how long it took for a scream to bring help. He listened to older slaves whisper stories about people who ran and disappeared, about places where chains didn't reach. Most of those stories ended badly. Torn backs, public hangings, heads on posts as warnings. Fear worked on most people. It didn't work on him. By 10, he was already considered trouble. Not loud, not defiant. Worse, quiet. Calm, unbroken. Plantation owners hate that kind. You can whip a man into submission. You can't whip calculation out of a child who's already thinking 5 steps ahead. They tried anyway. When he was 12, he was accused of stealing food. There was no proof. There didn't need to be. Hunger itself was treated as a crime. He was tied to a post and beaten in front of everyone, not to teach him a lesson, but to break something inside him. It didn't. As the blood dried on his back, something else hardened. Not rage. Rage burns out. This was colder, cleaner. A decision forming where hope used to be. He understood a brutal truth that day. Staying meant dying slowly. Running meant at least choosing how you die. The Civil War was over. Slavery was supposed to be dying. That's the lie history tells. In reality, plantations tightened control. Former slaves vanished. Patrols doubled. Owners knew the world was changing, and they reacted with violence. One night, everything snapped. Accounts differ, but every version shares the same core. A confrontation, a threat, a boy pushed too far. Some say he struck an overseer with a tool. Others say he saw a woman beaten unconscious and intervened. One story claims he killed a man by accident. Another says he ran before blood was spilled. Here's what matters. After that night, he could not stay. He didn't pack anything. He didn't say goodbye. Goodbyes were dangerous. He waited until the plantation slept, slipped past cabins, and vanished into trees he'd memorized since childhood. He ran barefoot through swamps that swallowed sound. Thorns tore his skin. Mosquitoes drank what little blood he had left. He didn't stop moving. He knew the rule: if they catch you within the first 48 hours, you're dead, or worse, made an example. Dogs were released by morning. Men with rifles followed. Bounties were posted. He learned fast how to walk in water to mask scent, how to sleep in trees, how to steal without being seen. Hunger clawed at him constantly, but fear kept his legs moving. This wasn't freedom. This was survival stripped down to its bones. Every mile he put between himself and the plantation pushed him closer to something else, something far more dangerous than chains. The frontier. The West didn't care who you were. It didn't care why you ran. It only asked one question. Can you live long enough to matter? And this boy, enslaved, hunted, and alone, was about to find out. By the 3rd day, the boy understood something clearly. The plantation hadn't been the worst place yet. The dogs were close. He could smell them before he heard them: wet fur, rot, and hunger. The men followed behind, rifles slung easy, confidence high. They'd done this before. Runaways usually broke by day 2. By day 3, they were desperate enough to make mistakes. Mistakes got you killed. He moved only at night. During the day, he buried himself in brush, mud, and shadows. When rain came, he thanked it like a god. Rain erased tracks. Rain bought time, but rain also meant cold, sickness, and shaking so violent his teeth rattled. Food was almost non-existent. He ate roots he recognized from watching older slaves survive lean seasons. Berries he wasn't sure about. Once he caught a snake with a rock and ate it raw because fire meant smoke, and smoke meant death. Sleep came in fragments, 10 minutes here, 15 there. Every snap of a branch sent his heart into his throat. Fear wasn't a feeling anymore, it was a constant pressure shaping every decision. On the 5th night, he made his first real mistake. He crossed a dirt road too late. Moonlight hit his body for just a second, but that was enough. A shout followed, then another. Boots thundered. A rifle cracked the air, the bullet slicing bark inches from his head. He ran. Not blindly, not panicked, straight into a creek, then downstream, then doubled back through reeds so thick they tore his skin open. He stayed underwater until his lungs screamed. When he surfaced, he didn't breathe loudly. He sipped air like a dying animal. The men cursed, the dogs whined, confused. That was the night he stopped being a boy. Something inside him recalibrated. Fear didn't leave, but it got organized, controlled, useful. He stopped reacting and started anticipating. Where men would search, where they wouldn't, what they expected him to do. And he did the opposite. Days blurred together. He crossed territory he'd only heard whispered about, no plantations, no order, no mercy. Places where white men killed white men for less than a glance, where law existed only if someone was strong enough to enforce it. The Old West wasn't freedom. It was indifference. In a half-abandoned settlement, he found his first weapon, not a gun, just a rusted knife left behind in a collapsed shack. He cleaned it carefully like it mattered, like it was a promise. Then came the bounty hunters. Not plantation men, worse, freelancers. They didn't care about punishment or examples. They cared about money. Alive paid more, dead paid enough. He spotted them first, 2 men moving wrong, too cautious for locals, too clean. They talked openly, assuming no one was listening. That arrogance almost got them killed. Almost. He tried to slip past them at dusk. The wind betrayed him. One man turned. Their eyes met. For half a second, neither moved. Then the chase exploded. This wasn't dogs and rifles from a distance. This was boots pounding dirt, curses flying, bullets snapping close enough to feel. He ran until his legs burned and his vision tunneled. When he tripped, the knife was already in his hand without conscious thought. The first man grabbed him. There was no heroic struggle, no speech, just panic and instinct. He slashed blindly, felt resistance, heard a sound he'd never forget, a wet, shocked gasp. The man fell back, clutching his throat. The second hunter froze, staring not at the boy but at the blood. That hesitation saved the boy's life. He ran again, faster than he ever had before. Hours later, shaking and empty, he vomited beside a ravine. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. From that moment on, he understood another brutal truth. If you hesitate, you die. If you're merciful, someone else isn't. Word traveled fast in places like this. A runaway who fought back, a kid who killed a hunter. Exaggerations spread like fire. He wasn't just property anymore, he was dangerous. By the time he crossed into Texas territory, he had nothing left to lose. No name. No past worth saving. No illusions about mercy. Only this certainty. The world had tried to erase him. And he wasn't done answering yet. By the time he reached the edge of real frontier towns, the boy no longer looked like a runaway. He looked like what the West produced when it chewed on someone long enough. Dirty clothes scavenged from dead men, a knife always within reach, eyes that didn't wander. He spoke less, listened more. People in these places didn't ask where you came from. They asked what you could do and whether you were a problem. At first, he was invisible. Invisible meant alive. He slept in stables, under wagons, in half-burned buildings no one wanted. He worked for food, cleaning, hauling, digging, anything that kept him close to people with guns. Not for protection, for observation. He watched how men carried themselves when they were dangerous, how they stood, how they rested their hands, how their eyes moved before violence. He learned that most gunfighters weren't fast. They were calm. Speed was a side effect of calm. The first man who truly noticed him was an ex-Confederate soldier turned drifter. Scarred face, missing 2 fingers, eyes that had seen too much and didn't bother hiding it. The man didn't ask the boy's name. He asked, "You trying to live or you trying to last?" The boy didn't answer. That was enough. The soldier taught him the basics, not out of kindness but practicality. How to clean a revolver, how to load without looking, how to draw without thinking about drawing, how to keep your weapon from becoming dead weight. No speeches, no father-son nonsense, just repetition until muscle replaced thought. The first gun the boy owned was cheap and worn. The grip didn't fit his hand right. He fixed that, sanded it, wrapped it, made it his. The first time he fired at a man intentionally, it wasn't a duel. It was an ambush. A gambler tried to rob him, assuming a young, quiet black kid would be easy. The gambler was wrong. The boy didn't warn him, didn't bluff. He shot when the man reached. The gambler lived. Barely. That mattered more than if he had died, because now the boy knew something most people never learn. Pulling the trigger was easier than living with it afterward. But the West didn't give time for reflection. Word spread, not loudly, not in newspapers, in saloons, in whispers. A kid who didn't miss. A kid who didn't talk. A kid who didn't flinch. Men tested him. They always do. A drunk cowboy shoved him in a bar, expecting fear. The boy didn't move. The second shove was harder. The third shove ended with a gun pressed quietly into the man's ribs. No shot fired. The cowboy apologized. That was new. Respect in the West wasn't given. It was extracted. The soldier didn't last. Fever took him in a nameless town. Before he died, he told the boy one thing that stuck. "Don't be fast, be finished." The boy took that to heart. He stopped relying on luck. He practiced. Dry draws, live draws, reloads in the dark. He learned angles, cover, how sound carried, how fear made people predictable. He also learned something uglier. People liked having him around. Not as a friend. As a weapon. Ranchers hired him quietly. Gamblers paid him to stand nearby. Lawmen looked the other way when he was useful. Criminals offered work. He took some. Refused others, always calculated. Every job sharpened his reputation. Not loud, not flashy. Reliables. Final. By the time he was grown, the boy was gone. What stood in his place was something the West understood. A man who didn't threaten. A man who ended things. People stopped asking where he came from. They started asking who he'd killed. And that's when Texas really began to notice him. By 1873, Texas was no longer a frontier. It was a pressure cooker. The war was over, but violence hadn't gone anywhere. It had just changed clothes. Former soldiers, displaced families, bandits, hired guns, crooked lawmen, all packed into the same dusty towns with grudges that never cooled. Guns were everywhere. Justice was optional. And that's where he thrived. By now he had a name, but people didn't say it out loud unless they had to. Names carried consequences. Instead, they described him indirectly. The quiet ones. That man. Don't start trouble, he's here. He didn't dress flashy. No silver revolvers, no dramatic coat. He looked ordinary on purpose. Ordinary men get underestimated. Underestimation killed faster than bullets. He chose his seats carefully, back to the wall, clear sightlines, exits mapped. When he entered a saloon, conversation didn't stop immediately. It slowed, like animals sensing weather. He never reached for his gun first. That's why he survived. The duel that cemented his reputation didn't start as a duel. A well-known gunman, white, loud, famous for killing men who embarrassed him, decided to make an example. He called the man out publicly, insulting him, using words designed to provoke a reaction. Everyone watched, waiting for the quiet man to break. He didn't. He waited. The loud gunman drew first. He always did. The quiet man fired once. The bullet hit center mass. No flourish, no second shot. The loud man dropped in the dirt, dead before he understood he'd lost. Silence followed. Not shock, recognition. From that day on, things changed. Men didn't test him for fun anymore. They planned, they whispered, they tried to stack odds. It didn't help. Ambushes failed because he expected them. Multiple attackers went down because they hesitated, unsure who should move first. Lawmen considered arresting him, then remembered how many men he'd killed who needed killing. He wasn't lawful. He wasn't outlaw. He was something worse. Independent. Criminals feared him because he didn't bluff. Lawmen feared him because he couldn't be controlled. Business owners feared him because violence followed him like a shadow, but they still paid him to stay. He never raised his voice. He never bragged. That terrified people more than any reputation. Stories spread, some true, most exaggerated, that he could draw faster than sight, that he'd killed 5 men in one night, that he never missed, that he'd been enslaved once and swore never to be owned again. Texas loves legends. But Texas also kills them. The more feared he became, the narrower his world got. Friends turned cautious. Strangers stared too long. Every town carried the possibility of someone trying to make their name by ending his. He knew it wouldn't last. Men like him don't retire. The final incident of that year proved it. A corrupt sheriff decided the quiet man had become inconvenient, too powerful, too unpredictable, a threat to order, or at least to the illusion of it. A warrant was issued. Fake charges, real intent. They tried to arrest him in daylight, with witnesses, expecting him to resist and give them an excuse. He didn't. He surrendered his guns calmly. That night, 3 deputies didn't survive the jailhouse. No one could ever prove how it happened. By morning, the cell was empty. The sheriff was dead. And the quiet man was gone. Texas erupted with rumors. Some called it justice, others called it murder. Pinkertons were mentioned. Bounties floated around numbers that made men stupid. But no body was ever found. By the end of 1873, people stopped asking when he'd be caught. They started asking something else. Had he finally gone too far? Or had he simply done what the West taught him to do? End threats before they ended him. Either way, the legend had peaked. And legends don't fade quietly. By the time winter settled in, Texas had already turned him into a story. Stories are what people use when the truth is too uncomfortable. Some swore he fled south into Mexico, where names meant nothing and guns meant everything. Others claimed he rode north, disappearing into territories where records were loose and graves were unmarked. A few insisted he never left Texas at all, that he simply learned how to stop existing. No one could prove anything. What is certain is this: after 1873, confirmed sightings stopped. That doesn't happen by accident. Men like him don't vanish because they want peace. They vanish because every road forward ends in a bullet. He understood math better than most. Every reputation has a breaking point. Every legend attracts someone reckless enough to try their luck. If he was smart, and everything about him suggests he was, he didn't chase glory. He killed it. There are records that might be him under different names. A ranch hand in New Mexico known for never drinking. A gun-for-hire in Arizona who worked once, then vanished. A silent foreman in northern Mexico who carried himself like a man who'd survived too much. But records in that era were lies written by whoever held the pen. And men like him never did. Here's the part history doesn't like to sit with. He didn't become feared because he loved violence. He became feared because violence followed him from the moment he was born. People love to debate whether he was a hero or a villain. That's lazy thinking. Those categories belong to people who had choices. He didn't. From childhood, the lesson was simple: submit or suffer. When he rejected submission, suffering didn't stop. It just changed shape. The whip became the gun. The overseer became the lawman. Control wore different uniforms, but it was always control. So he adapted. That's the uncomfortable truth. The West didn't make him violent. It rewarded him for it. Every time he survived a fight, the world reinforced the same rule it taught him as a child. Force works. Mercy gets you killed. Silence keeps you alive. Freedom for him wasn't land or money or respect. It was not being owned. And fear was the price he paid for that. If he lived long enough to grow old, it wouldn't have been peaceful. Men like him don't sleep easily. The past doesn't loosen its grip just because the shooting stops. Every creak at night sounds like a door opening. Every raised voice feels like a threat. If he died young, it wasn't tragic. It was predictable. That's the part people avoid saying out loud. The Old West wasn't a place where trauma healed. It was a place where trauma learned how to aim. So when you hear his story, an enslaved boy who became the most feared gunslinger in Texas, don't romanticize it. Don't turn it into a power fantasy. Don't pretend fear equals victory. Ask the harder question: what kind of world creates a child who survives only by becoming something everyone else is afraid of? Because the answer isn't buried in the past. It's a pattern, and patterns repeat. Whenever power decides some lives are expendable and calls the consequences legend. That's why his name doesn't matter. The system that forged him does.